Do you think politics has been disrupted forever?
The interest on our debt is crushing us. It is causing problems in the bond market. And what could happen is either a really quick or a really gradual process that makes the United States look more and more like some of these low GDP European countries. And that should terrify us in and of itself as to whether this happens quickly or gradually. And if it happens really quickly, then it could also just lead to massive unrest in a way that we aren't prepared for, let alone, the financial misery that could come with another Great Depression-like event.
The United States has two gigantic things happening simultaneously: population collapse and a horrible fiscal situation. And those two things in tandem give another country the ability to come in and be like, okay, you used to be the best one, now we're going to be the best one.
You're passing the things that are supposed to fix the inflation alongside the things that are causing the inflation at the same time. That just sounds so nonsensical.
I just have so many questions about the Trump-Elon stuff, the Trump stuff. And it's like, my question was, is this unprecedented? And it seemed like it's very unique. And my question was, are there any parallels we can draw to any other time in history that sort of describes what just went down in the last week? So I'm curious to hear your take. Is this like a one-of-one situation?
I mean, I really cannot think of anything. And people have sort of racked their brains and flipped through all of their history books in the last 6 months to try and figure out, in terms of industry and government blending, whether one single individual is a potential precedent. And nobody's really come up with an answer to that. But even on the question of like presidential personnel, where you have someone break so viciously, but also so with such volatility, where sort of a roller coaster up and down of loyalties. Even as we're recording this, less than 12 hours ago, Elon Musk posted at 3 a.m. on Wednesday that he regrets some of his posts about Trump. He's deleted some of them. Right. Presumably the ones he's deleted, but maybe not. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's beyond that. Maybe he doesn't regret the Epstein tweet, for example. So I can think of absolutely nothing that compares to what happened.
Yeah. So what's your So maybe for the audience, for those that are not familiar with your work, so Emily is on Undercurrents on YouTube, and she also panels from time to time on Breaking Points, right? And then so she does a bunch of commentary on politics. And what was your take from the time when I reached out to you last week, which was when Elon Musk, to a global audience of hundreds of millions of people, was like, the sitting president of the United States didn't release the Epstein files because of what? To almost 5-6 days later, where we actually sit down and now we get this apology thing, like just high level, like what happened? What's your take on this? What are the ramifications? And then we'll drill down.
I'm not surprised at all by Musk's regret. I was surprised and took a giant L when Musk broke aggressively with Trump, because both of them were in a very mutually beneficial, but also very high stakes relationship. And both of them stood to lose a lot, but also gain a lot from the relationship. So I always expected that, because they're both reasonably intelligent people, and they both had so much to gain from the relationship, but also so much to lose from it, that yes, the relationship would wind down, but it would be done in a very low-key way that didn't make it look like anybody was taking a step back from anything, like anybody had lost, like anyone had come out on the losing end of a power struggle. So I was surprised by how kinetic and explosive the breakup was, because it just rationally made zero sense. And I think that's vindicated by Elon already expressing some of his regret. But, it was the level of the level of disentangling, or the intensity of the disentanglement, was genuinely shocking, because Musk has so many people that he brought to Washington who had to go to work with a smile on their face, knowing that they were an ambassador for Doge and Musk. So I don't know. I mean, you actually know Musk as like a personality much better than I do. I guess maybe it was naive that I was caught off guard by how kind of emotional he is as an actor.
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you that it's not strange what he did, which is a shocking thing to say. But it is not strange. So if I think back to his previous, let's say, outbursts that were public, he had that in 2018, that Thai cave guy where he called him, the pedo guy tweet. Did you ever recall that at all?
Yeah, but I haven't thought about it for years. Wow.
Yeah. So he just randomly called a guy a pedophile, right on X. He during the April Fool's, he made an April Fool's joke in 2017 or 2016 when Tesla was on the verge of going bankrupt. He made a social media post where he was like, Tesla is now bankrupt, as a joke. And then the stock fell 20%.
Great joke.
Great joke. He went on Joe Rogan to smoke pot live on air. And that put him in a 3-year-long drug regimen with the government because he runs space contracts with the government for defense. And they're like, why is the CEO smoke? Okay. He made a post about taking Tesla private at $420 when there seemed to be enough for him to do that. And then he got sued by the SEC, and then he had to pay, I don't know, $15-20 million in fines. I think Elon as a personality, what I've learned about him is that the reason why he has so much support is because he is willing to wear his emotions on his sleeve. And he comes across as a very transparent, passionate figure about the things that he's really passionate about. And he makes it very easy to go on a mission with him. And I think that's why his companies are so successful, because that culture, you can feel it the second you step on. As somebody who worked at his company, the second you step on, you can feel that everyone's there for an existential reason. The flip side of that is that if he feels like he's working on something that's existential and then people are just in the way, he just implodes. He self implodes, and then he has these emotional outbursts that we saw publicly. So it's very interesting hearing you say that you were surprised by that, because so I was surprised that he pointed it at the sitting president of the United States to a global audience. But I was not surprised that it actually happened, if that makes any sense. Yeah. So I don't know if that helps give any context, or if you have any.
He's a highly autistic person who is like a magnet for other highly autistic people, and that autism and OCD, like the inability to tolerate some of these things, is like just. Imagine the number of problems.
And this is not to excuse it, right? We want to be very clear. This is not an excuse of that outburst. It's sort of like try to sort of frame and explain. Why it happened. The
superpower has its shadow. Thank you to the sponsor of today's podcast, Rebellion Air. We know that a lot of you in our audience are big-time Tesla investors, but just because you're willing to make a big bet on a single company, that doesn't mean that you don't think about how to manage your risk to the downside. And let's face it, once that big concentrated Tesla position grows to be worth $1 million or more, it can definitely be a good time to bring in some professional help. But who can you hire that isn't going to give you cookie cutter advice or scold you for not being diversified enough? That's where Rebellion Air can help. Bradford Ferguson and Matt Smith are big time retail investors like you, and they've done tons of unique and insightful research around things like Tesla's FSD and energy, so they understand exactly where your conviction comes from. But they're also professionals, and through Rebellion Air, they specialize in helping investors like you with big concentrated investments to protect yourself from the downside risk while growing your share count over time using strategies like trimming and adding or covered calls. Not only that, but they can also help you to create a money master plan from your financial first principles. If that sounds interesting to you and you've got $1 million position or more in a company like Tesla, you can head on over to rebellionaire.com/Farzad using the link in the description to let them know that we sent you. That's rebellionaire.com/Farzad. And now, back to the podcast. And this is the shadow side of the superpower. And so the superpower in his businesses has been to be able to stamp out all of these, like You don't land rockets backward in the middle of the ocean because you didn't figure out every single problem that was in the way and eliminate it with ruthless intensity. And so it's that applied to now this very messy realm of politics. That's always been the shadow side of him and his businesses. Like if you read any of the biographies or any of the reporting about how he handles personal relationships, like he has this very intense care for humanity in the abstract, global, long-term sense. And like this single human individual in front of him, he can act with just ruthless not caring in order to serve that big long-term mission. So
yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I look at the last, I guess it's been almost a year now, of Elon Musk's intensifying relationship with Donald Trump, first the Trump campaign, and then obviously the Trump administration, as an exercise in, I think, a pretty clever strategy of how he handled Donald Trump, who is not someone everybody kind of cracks the code to, but Elon Musk did. He seemed to know that you have to get along to go along with Donald Trump. I thought, handled it, maybe it seems silly because the bar is so low, but I actually thought he managed his relationship with Trump very well. He was constantly lavishing him in praise and flattery. He was additive. He was mission driven and loyal to the nth degree. And so it was surprising to me to see what was strategic and calculated and highly rational from his perspective lapse, because I thought he had been pretty calculated. But actually, that additional context, I think, is a very grounding and useful reminder of how Elon has, sort of been his strength and weakness. The double-edged sword of his capriciousness is, it comes into, of course, was going to come into play at some point.
Yeah, I think the existential sort of mission-driven decision from my read is like he was legitimately convinced that if the Democrats came to power in 2024, he had a legitimate concern that civilization would collapse or would trend faster towards collapsing because of some of the authoritarian tendencies that the party seemed to employ from COVID up until the election. The sort of the winter of the unvaccinated, or all the different shutdown of the businesses, then sort of the way they selected Kamala as the sort of president, like the candidate for them. It was very undemocratic, it felt like, right, et cetera, et cetera. I think from that perspective,
I guess
if I view it, go ahead.
I read it a little. I mean, all of those things are concerning, obviously, but I read their passion for just absolutely insane levels of spending as the biggest thing that he viewed as that risk, because like in his mind he wants to get a civilization on Mars. Obviously that is a multi-decade process, and that level of spending is basically guaranteed to implode the United States government and potentially the United States civilization and throw the whole world into upheaval and chaos economically and geopolitically. Like, COVID was just a preview of how hard it can be to make things in the real world in our extremely interconnected system of global commerce and trade. And, that is actually something that is pretty fragile. And if we continue on these levels of spending, that are in excess of our, like, it's not just that we're spending, it's that we're spending far in excess of our ability to pay. And so we're guaranteeing that we're either going to have to print money or have massive inflation or both. And, those things over the time period that Elon cares about, the next 50 years, unless there's, some massive windfall from AI productivity, which also, like there's potential there for positive things, but there's also massive risk attached to it. That makes it very hard to make the types of complicated products like rockets, like satellites, like, humanoid Optimus robots, that are all technologies that are absolutely necessary in order to colonize Mars. And so, in my view, this whole involvement in politics has been him doing blocking and tackling to make sure that the mission to settle Mars is still possible over this 30, 40, 50 year time frame. And that's why it is such an existential betrayal of Elon's mission for Trump to continue spending on all of the mandatory budgets at Biden COVID emergency levels, minus a few nips and tucks at the edges.
Do you think the Trump administration is actually going to try and reduce spending? How do you view that whole play from the Trump admin perspective? Or do you think this is sort of more of the same? The government has to spend, Medicare, Medicaid, defense are just too big of a thing to cut. How do you view that entire scenario?
Yeah, because if there were to be a structural change, and that is what would be required to actually cut spending. You have to restructure the American government, basically. And DOGE was trying to do one part of that, which is cut waste, fraud, and abuse. But you actually have to restructure our social safety net, our federal social safety net program, period, in order to tackle the debt crisis in the United States. And this is where, for me, it seemed naive for Elon Musk to break with Trump over the big, beautiful bill, because that bill, it's a reconciliation bill. So it in DC terms, you can just pass it with a simple majority. It has to be related to spending and budget. You can't jam every omnibus thing into it, although they find creative ways to do it. For example, Stephen Miller is selling this primarily as an immigration bill. So that tells you everything you need to know about DC. But the idea that Donald Trump, with a slim margin, a hair width margin in Congress, in both the House and the Senate, would be able to make the structural changes to tackle the debt crisis with a single bill, I think is insane from Elon's perspective, because it just we may all want it to happen. Trump may want it to happen, but with the reconciliation bill, there's only so much that you can do, and you can't really do that much. And so if that was his expectation, and I kind of think to some extent that it was, this bill, Ron Johnson is completely correct, Rand Paul is completely correct, is larded up. There are the spending levels are ridiculous, and they can get them lower. And even as we're talking right now, senators are huddling. The Senate Finance Committee needs to get the text of the bill that they think can go back to the House ready. And that means they're haggling over things like what constitutes a cut to Medicaid versus what's just trimming waste, fraud, and abuse from Medicaid and all of that. That's what now they may go after Medicare too. They may find creative ways to get the spending lower, and they should. Even if they do that, this doesn't reverse the Titanic. It doesn't turn the Titanic of the debt crisis around. It doesn't put a drop in the bucket, frankly, and I don't see how it could. I do think it's bad to just say, hey, we have to, keep the spending at Biden levels. And, that's as a percentage of, I think debt as a percentage of GDP, interest payments on the debt, I want to say doubled over the course of the Biden administration. I mean, there was really a significant escalation of spending over the course of the Biden administration. And that stuff should be pared back. On the other hand, the reality is that they don't have Congress. I mean, they have Congress, but they don't really have Congress because the margins are so thin that not even Donald Trump would be able to get enough Republicans on board to make a structural, dramatic change. So I wonder if that has tempered Musk's disappointment over the course of the last week and is why he's maybe coming back around. But yeah, a little bit of everyone is wrong is kind of my take on it.
Yeah. So let me ask you a two-part question. So from your sense, how many people in Congress, or how, politicians, commentators, how often does the debt situation and the deficit situation and the interest payment situation in the United States, the fiscal, like the actual numbers, like if you look at the P&L and the balance sheet of the United States, it's dog shit. Yeah. It's not good, right? And you look at what are the KPIs, the metrics that come out of that? We have worse health outcomes, worse educational outcomes, a larger wealth gap, right? Social services that are underperforming, increasing debt, so it's like every KPI is broken. So how prevalent is that factual statement in government, and what would actually be required for us to sort of like actually move the Titanic? So yeah, let me know how you're thinking about that.
No, I mean, there's like zero serious conversation about it here, and Sirius is doing a lot of work there. But you hear both parties invoke the spending problem when it's politically convenient and pay lip service to it. But there's not a sort of crushing awareness of how urgent the problem is in the day-to-day of Washington. There are a couple of nonprofits that work on these issues here and there, but it is basically absent from the consciousness of American politics in DC, and especially like disproportionate to the urgency. It's absent, but like it's generally not. It briefly was during the Tea Party years and a little bit after the Tea Party years, but it's generally not weighing heavily, let alone as heavily as it should, on the daily conversations, because the political incentives, and everyone acknowledges this, are not there for it to be a daily urgent concern. And the reason for that is the political incentive to tackle entitlement spending is not there. There's just no political reason for people to want to, even Donald Trump, the man who appointed Elon Musk to oversee Doge, did not want to and does not want to touch Medicaid because in all seriousness, people rely on it. And to tinker with a program that people rely on is to risk serious political blowback, let alone, people's health and all of that. But the problem, as you were just getting at, is that these programs are not good. Like, our healthcare system is a disaster. Everybody knows that, not a controversial point. But the sort of endless spigot of money, and then you get into the cycle where it's like, because we're tinkering with the spending levels, we're gonna put this leash on, and then we'll take it off in 5 years so that the bill is scored by the CBO in a way that we want to see it be scored by the CBO, and it doesn't add X. It's all like fake accounting. It's based on something real-ish, but it's fake accounting, and it's the math is doing what they want the math to do. So all that is to say, the programs just get worse over time, and health gets worse over time. And we're stuck in a cycle where there just is not a political incentive to drag us out of the cycle.
Do you personally view that as an existential sort of item? Like, walk me through how you view it from your perspective.
No, that's a great question. I think it absolutely is. And I would refer people to the conversation that Ron Johnson had with Tucker Carlson recently, where Johnson, I think, he's very much, I actually just interviewed him not that long ago, and I'm from Wisconsin, so I'm very familiar with him and kind of grew up, and he was a senator, I think elected senator when I was in high school. He's
Badger fan? Are you a Badger fan?
Of course, yeah.
Of course, all right. We'll meet you. I think we played this year. I went to Penn State. I don't know if I actually played this year or not. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Well, we can all agree Penn State is fine, but there's no way Maryland should be playing the Badgers, quote unquote, Big Ten.
I agree.
Thank you. We can all agree on that. But anyway, moving on. The
Oregon is going to crush all of you.
The first Badger game I went to was against Oregon, actually. But anyway,
nice.
It was fun. But when Ron Johnson, who's really always been an outsider in DC, he goes on Tucker's show and I think outlines this in very basic terms, that he's frustrated because Republicans don't even talk about them this way, despite being the party of like fiscal responsibility, which is why I honestly think Republicans are more responsible for this problem than anybody else, because they're the ones that say they take it seriously and don't. Democrats barely pretend anymore, but Republicans do. And it is the interest on our debt is crushing us. It is causing problems in the bond market. And what could happen is either a really quick or a really gradual process that makes the United States look more and more like some of these low GDP European countries where they may have wonderful character, and we are all, seeing the threads on X. The American mind can't conceive of this, and it's people eating croissants in a wonderful historic street in some small town in France. Like, they may have wonderful character and culture and all of that, but they are, in terms of like their material well-being, significantly less well off than us. And that is, well, they coast off our largesse. So we won't be there anymore. They will get poorer as we get poorer. And I think the question is whether,
and they already can't defend themselves.
Exactly. And so I think the question is whether that happens really quickly. And I don't think anybody knows the answer, because the economy right now is basically a black box because of things like the debt. And nobody knows the answer to that question, and that should terrify us in and of itself as to whether this happens quickly or gradually. And if it happens really quickly, then it could also just lead to massive unrest in a way that we aren't prepared for, let alone, the financial misery that could come with another Great Depression-like event.
Yeah, thank you so much for walking through that, because that's a very sort of a different frame of the problem that we're not used to hearing, because we view it from a technological perspective, and then hearing you sort of frame it from a more political DC perspective is very helpful, because I think what it tells me is that it seems like we're like, if you fast forward the clock 10, 20 years down the road, given our fiscal situation, we are going to run into a wall regardless of what we do. And so like the way I think about it is two different ways. Number one, the economy doesn't grow fast enough to put aside the pain that we're going to incur from our lack of fiscal responsibility, which we're going to get. So we end up in the Europe situation, right? Where we might tell ourselves that we're the best country in the world, but in reality, we don't have much upward mobility. We're getting crushed by our public spending. People don't want to really make stuff or build businesses here anymore because the taxes are going to become too high to fund those programs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We get closer to like a hybrid of like a China-Europe situation, right, where China basically has to artificially boost the economy all the freaking time to get themselves out of insane sort of like public decisions they've made from a government perspective. So that's one outcome, and that's a bad outcome. And so given the reality that it's unlikely for DC to actually seriously take on the deficit problem, the only way to really make that less of an issue is to dramatically grow the economy. Like grow the economy at a level that tax revenue just far outstrips the debt, okay? But what is the forcing function for that to happen in today's day and age? Well, it's artificial. Go ahead, Hans.
I guess continuing on with what you're saying, to do that, we're going to have to use artificial intelligence.
Yes.
And the artificial intelligence is going to disproportionately displace somebody, which is going to fuel then this populist uprising and sentiment as well. And so it's like there's no clean solution.
Yeah, the I got left behind group. We're going to have a segment of the population, and the faster this happens, the bigger that group's going to be. Because the faster this AI growth happens, you're going to have a bigger proportion of people that won't be able to adjust quickly enough to this new reality that it is. And then those people, all of a sudden, if you displace them too hard, they're going to get violent, because that's what happens. That's how humans act, right? So to me, it's like the United States, like unless we seriously worry about, like we seriously tackle our spending problem, in 10 to 20 years time, we're going to face that reality head on. Right. And both outcomes look really bad. Like, and there doesn't seem to be like a middle ground. So I don't know if y'all think I'm being too existential or what, but I don't see it any other way.
I mean, I think this is the thing that underscores Elon's frustration, because this is like, if there was ever going to be a moment where we could tackle that problem head on, it was supposed to be right now. And our inability to do that in this moment when this is literally the best opportunity we've ever had in the last, number of decades to take this head on, at the same point that we're really teetering on the edge of, is this a fast problem or a slow problem, is why this is such a frustrating moment for Elon.
I mean, Doge, this would have been politically impossible, but if Doge wanted to find the most money to like really put a dent in the debt, it could have been reconceived as a project to, and many people have tried to do this, study Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and recommend structural changes. Politically, it would have been really hard to have a billionaire oligarch, going through the entitlement programs and recommending changes that might pay back for people.
Come on.
But either way, actually, that may have been an opportunity in retrospect. There's all kinds of, the government funding is hilarious. Like Rand Paul does his Festivus report every holiday season, and Tom Coburn used to have a lot of fun with the crazy government spending items. So it's much more like low hanging fruit, obviously, and there's a need to cut some of it, just not because it's silly, but because it's inefficient and it's an unjust use of taxpayer money. On the other hand, Doge reconceived as a just fair way to like wean people off of the prior structure, the status quo, with compassion and an interest in maintaining social harmony, or even restoring social harmony, would have been an interesting project, because there's nothing. I mean, we're locked into this box of our own. We built it. We built ourselves into this lockbox, essentially. Yeah. And, to get out of it, we have to fix something. And that's the only real way to do it.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's unfortunate about it, like, let's say Trump is able to unlock the economy. Let's say the actions is taken around, deregulation. The tariff situation does onshore manufacturing and supply chain. A bunch of high quality jobs are created. The AI revolution takes hold, and you start massively increasing efficiency and value per unit of time. And GDP grows 3, 4, 5% per year, which would be unbelievable, right? Do we really think that that's going to create a forcing function for us to be like, okay, now we should spend less?
No, of course not. Yeah.
So it's like,
no. Nope.
Yeah.
It's like it's crazy.
The other
pouring
thing,
gasoline on the fire.
Yeah.
Elon is right about the birth rate. I mean, people think of the birth rate from his perspective as like because he frames it this way to some extent, but as like more of a culture war item. But it's really an item that overlaps culture war and economics, because the crushing birth rate is creating significant problems in the debt conversation. And so we need more people, we need more growth and less spending. And right now, I have no reason to believe that we don't follow the trajectory that we appear to be on, and that we've already seen play out in Western Europe. But, at least we have the benefit of their example, and they, there's nothing after us for them. They can try to go to China. And, certainly I can see other countries, probably not Western Europe, but I can see other countries doing that. But the world, and particularly the West, relies on the United States for medical research. They rely on us, not just for that, but for military. And these different things are, they take for granted. We take for granted the prosperity that comes from the United States and, our pharmaceutical companies, our research base. Like, these things are really significant.
And furthermore, one of the additional aspects of the military presence that we have around the world is that we do secure that open global free trade, that it is our Navy that protects the ability of this global economy to even function. Because if ships can't get from point A to point B without getting hijacked or pirated or any of those things, like, this whole thing just goes away.
Yeah. Do you think there is an effort, or do you think, in the same way like fiscal responsibility, how is DC viewing the collapsing birth rate? Is that even a topic of discussion? Are there ways to solve it?
No. So The DC unfortunately sees the collapsing birth rate as a curiosity relegated to conspiratorial fringes. They find it to be freaky, and they find it to be affiliated with like fringe.
Why does DC hate facts?
Because they're not politically helpful.
Well, right, and DC is such a cultural bubble. DC, New York, they're very different cities. LA, but they are bubbles of wealth. Like Charles Murray has documented this with the super zip phenomenon coming apart. Most of the wealthiest zip codes in the country are surrounding Washington, DC, actually. And so, as Murray documented, the more educated you are, the more you tend to live around more educated, wealthy people, and the more your culture. This is actually new in American history. We used to have a lot more mingling across socioeconomic boundaries, and those boundaries weren't as stratified as they are now. But I think that's one of the reasons that DC doesn't take certain things seriously, like immigration during the Biden era, because it's a total feedback loop inside the bubble, and the bubble is increasingly thicker. And so if they're hearing about the birth rate from Elon Musk, they're like, oh my gosh, those you see it comes up in the coverage of the New York Times. Maybe the birth rate will get a serious consideration in a story once a year from a mainstream outlet, but otherwise reporters are like, you sound like Elon, or you sound like one of those conservative freaks who's worried about the great replacement theory and is just trying to like repopulate the whites. So there's no conversation about it at all.
My God.
It reminds me of the Toyota Prius episode of South Park, just in a little bit different context.
Oh, they're the ones that they like smelling their own farts?
Yeah, they're just inside the car, and the car runs on their farts, and they just love it so much.
Yeah.
It's a bubble.
I mean, man. That's so disheartening to hear. So because it's like, so that infrastructure is what sets the future of the United States. Right? Like, am I wrong in saying that?
No, that's right. Yeah.
Okay. So that's so terrifying. And so the analogy I can think of when you describe that is public companies. Are you familiar with the Innovator's Dilemma?
Remind me. I think I am, but I couldn't tell you it.
Yeah, it's a book that was written by, oh my God, Christensen.
Yeah, Clayton Christensen. He was he's like one of the premier professors at Harvard Business School for a long time. He passed away a few years ago. But yeah, basically, one of the godfathers of the way that corporations in the United States are run these days, because he taught all the MBAs that then go into all these companies and have their, different strategies for maximizing shareholder value. So he's the one who wrote it.
This is like a big Silicon Valley era of like the Facebook, Twitter, optimism era book, right?
Yes. So it looks at, he did this long case study of a whole bunch of companies over the last number of decades in Silicon Valley, as the computer evolved from being these mainframes to being these personal computers. There are obviously, many different phases of what that looked like. And he kept seeing that the companies that dominated in one instantiation of the technology, you would think that those would be the companies that, as the technology transformed and was able to be smaller and cheaper and all this stuff, that they would be the ones who would win in the new thing. And they always died every single time. Like the technology would make a slight change, and then the old company would just implode and fail. And these new startups would come onto the scene, and they would start by taking customers away from these big companies that the big companies didn't really care about because they were small customers, and they, their needs were like at the periphery of what the core offering of the big company was. And then over time, the new technology would get so good that it would absolutely, displace the old technology, and the company that started out small while the technology was small would then grow with the technology, and it would kill the old company that was big. And it was so big that it would crush the technology under its weight if it tried to fully make the leap, just like leave the old technology behind, go all in on the new technology, their overhead was so big that it would they would go bankrupt anyway. So they're kind of like caught in this no-win situation.
Yeah.
And just like over and over and over again.
So the U.S. government, so what you just described reminds me of that concept where the apparatus we have to operate the country has reached a certain scale and level and sort of like a bubble-ish nature that it is fundamentally incapable of solving the problem. Like there's nothing they can do to solve the problem. And so that's like, for example, Kodak, Xerox, right? You can go down the line of all these giant Blockbuster, like these giant companies, MySpace, things that used to be huge that people were like, this thing's going to be around for 1,000 years. Yahoo is another one, right? And what happens is once they reach a certain critical mass and they have wrapped themselves within walls that, they're basically smelling their own farts, or they're just incapable of seeing what's outside of that wall, this entire new thing comes by and it just blows them right over. It's like it just comes by and it says goodbye, right? So in the case of the United States, my huge fear with all of this, and I'm really curious to hear your take on this, is like, this is like China's dream.
Yeah.
This is China's dream, right? Where the United States has two gigantic things happening simultaneously. Population collapse and a horrible fiscal situation. And those two things in tandem give another country the ability to come in and be like, okay, you used to be the best one, now we're going to be the best one, because you're not dealing with those fundamental issues. The one silver lining for the US is that China also has those issues. Right? China has those same exact issues. Europe has worse issues than they do, right? So the United States being the least bad country out of all of them is maybe why there isn't so much urgency to get it fixed. But the problem is that if you have those two problems, you don't solve for them, you collapse anyway, right? So
everyone can collapse together just because you might collapse slower than other people.
Yeah. And I don't know I don't even know where I'm taking this. It's just like what you've just described is so eye-opening for me, because in my head, when I'm thinking about the leaders of the country, I would feel like if I was, maybe I'm just extremely naive, and I'm sure I am, it's like they would all have this on their boards somewhere that says, last quarter's collapse, like birth rate, last quarter's debt. They don't. Yeah. Like how are those two not the most important metrics as a country?
And this is what the Tea Party era was constantly hammering away at, like saying, there were congressmen at the time who would, and there's some of them are still there, but who would, make a show of having a national debt clock on their desk or in their campaign headquarters or something like that. And it basically just faded away. And
why did it fade away?
A lot of reasons. I think, it's still there because Elon tapped into it with Doge. Like that's where the MAGA marriage with Doge made sense, is that a lot of the Tea Partiers became MAGA. And so it was latent. And because it's a real obvious concern and people feel like their money is being abused by an out of control federal government. But also it collapses when people also say, hey, my town is being ravaged by the opioid crisis, which the government failed to intervene when laws were being broken by bad corporate actors for a long time. So give us money. We need the money to deal with this. We need the farm bailouts for these tariffs. All of those different things that MAGA populism involves. It feels like an ill-advised time to start talking about austerity again in 2016, 2017. And they still very much believe in tax cuts generating growth. So we're in another one of those experimental periods. Will the tax cuts generate growth as there's a confluence with an American AI boom, which is coming? I mean, even if people want to have strict regulations on AI, there's only so much regulation that you can do, period. Like take China out of the picture, take the question of competition with China out of the picture. AI is sort of going to, by its nature, evade regulation. So there's only so much that you can do. So there will be, in all likelihood, tax cuts. There will be an AI explosion. Does that generate enough growth to start riding the ship? Does that change American culture to efficiency culture in a way that energizes. Is Doge a proto efficiency movement? Was that the first sign that something is coming that's much bigger and more powerful, as people look more and more to things like UBI because of mass white collar displacement? I don't know. It could go in so many different directions.
How often does that conversation come up in DC, like in your circles or the circles that you like are close to? Is that part of the discussion of the future?
So the new right thinks about that a lot. And the new right is sort of split on AI in interesting ways. A lot of the conversations that I've had with friends in the kind of new right space over the last couple of years have definitely focused on things like the birth rate and structural cultural changes that'll come about because of AI. Washington, D.C. in general, there are people who are more on politics and people who are more on culture and thought and those sorts of things. But most of D.C. is politics. And in politics in general, it is so myopic. It is so wrapped up in the short-term tug of war power struggle because of campaigns. It's every 2 years in the House of Representatives, every 4 years, and we all are exhausted by and know very well that those 4 years really become 2 years. You start running every 2 years, basically, an election, so a presidential election. So it's myopic, it's short-sighted, and it's not focused on a lot of the long-term problems. And people in DC just are much more interested in dealing with the news of the day than they are with the long term, for the most part.
Yeah, good on.
So can we zoom out to the, I guess, power dynamics of trying to hold a coalition together and like where this goes? That, one of the things that Sagar talks about is how there's always just this cycle where it's almost inevitable that, to get power, you need to bring all these different people together. They're all united by, we don't like this thing. And then, so once those people that you displace are out of the way, then the forcing function for people to stay together kind of dissipates. And so then you get the factions within the coalition fighting for, hey, we want our agenda. Hey, we want our agenda. And the one that I've been thinking about recently is really this populist right versus the more tech right. And Mike Solana has been, harping on this and thinking about it in interesting ways. But from my 10,000 foot view, it seems like if you looked at the American political landscape as a spectrum from left to right, and you've got the, super hardcore progressives over on one side, and then you've got your populist MAGA on the other side. And there's like the moderates and the independents and the libertarians and the Tea Party conservatives. Like all these people are kind of somewhere in the middle there. And right now, the MAGA wing is trying to push their agenda so hard that they are doing things that are alienating all of those people that were in the middle, that those are the people that actually win the election. Like, the hardcore progressives and the hardcore populist MAGA types, like neither of them are going to win anything by themselves. Like no one thinks that those are sane people that deserve to be in power. But when there's part of their agenda that kind of aligns with the middle part of the country, that they're able to get some support. But now that they're, they had the support, they've got the governing power. Is Steve Bannon going to tank the the ability of the coalition to stay together to where it just absolutely falls apart in the midterms by doing all the things that legitimately piss off all of the people that swung the election? Basically would, I think, disown, disavow, and perhaps legitimately hate someone like Steve Bannon. Where do you see all that going? Because I think this is really going to be the key in how all of this unfolds.
Yeah, and this is totally unprecedented. Like, things are cyclical, and these coalitions are fragile. The big picture is the crumbling of the fusionist coalition of the conservative movement, where you had people who were more libertarian joining with people who wanted a strong national defense, and people who wanted social conservatism, to a three-legged stool, as Frank Meyer called it. And that's basically busting apart right now at the seams. And so the conservative movement is trying to sort of bridge the gap. Like, is Peter Thiel, for example, or Elon Musk, the figure who can bring these people together on the one hand in the future? Because if you look at Elon, he found a lot of common ground with social conservatives on questions like the birth rate, on questions like transgenderism. Then he found a lot of overlap with the strong national defense folks, because he's a defense contractor and has revolutionized, for example, NASA and the way that we approach the space program. On the other hand, libertarians love him because he wants to cut spending. So maybe the future of the GOP coalition actually looks more like tech than it does Bannon. And Musk, by the way, had a flare up over H-1B visas over the holidays, with Steve Bannon. But at the same time, had a total aggressive hostility to open borders and the Biden era immigration policies. So there might be a way where the tech right just becomes the right, whether or not Steve Bannon likes it, because that's the sort of umbrella that's just most viable. But the way that I've been thinking about it a lot lately is that for the average voter, they have a hierarchy of priorities. And so I think the LA riots are a really good example of that right now. I've seen, for example, Political Playbook here in DC this morning saying that Gavin Newsom has handled it well. And for me, I think that totally misunderstands the average American's hierarchy of priorities, which is that they may hate seeing the scenes of a militarized law enforcement response to protests in Los Angeles. The average American, they may think that's anti-American and weird. But what they really hate is Gavin Newsom insisting that this is about lowercase d democracy and California should remain a sanctuary state and all of that. Like, they hate that more than they hate what Trump is saying. They support Trump cracking down more than they support Gavin Newsom trying to crack down on Trump's crackdown. And so I think that's for the right, where there's room to negotiate between Elon and Bannon. Bannon sees some of this stuff as utterly existential. The populist revolution he sees as utterly existential. Elon sees things that conflict with that as utterly existential. And that's where their relationship is utterly untenable and only lasted through the election, where they played nice until the election and then it all broke open. And so I'm most curious to see the negotiation where people like Bannon say, for example, closing the borders, existential. So he and Elon get along on that. Elon thinks bringing in more, high performing immigrants is existential. If we don't do it, we're screwed. Bannon thinks if we do it, we're screwed. And that's where that I think is really interesting. That's like their top priority. And when your top priorities clash, that's when things become untenable. But otherwise, I think maybe Elon is walking back his big, beautiful bill stuff a little bit by saying he regrets what he said on Trump, because I think everyone realizes that bill, restoring fiscal sanity in the United States or starting to tackle the debt crisis, that's nobody's top priority because it's impossible. And I wonder if that plays a role in repairing the friction or the bonds of the relationship.
And just out of curiosity, do you think that Bannon is incapable of understanding how out of touch he seems with reality when he calls for something like nationalize SpaceX tonight? That just is the fundamentally most un-American thing that I could possibly imagine. And does he not understand how that comes across to 60, 70, 80% of the country?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know that how the country looks at SpaceX. I think that SpaceX is something that has a good brand with most Americans. Like they're amazed by what did Trump describe it as, hugging the rocket. I think people are amazed by that, and they think it's really impressive. But I don't know that people have super deep takes on SpaceX. And I know people don't like the word nationalize. Like I don't think the average American likes that word. I think it comes across as like fascist,
communist?
Almost. Yeah, fascist or communist. Either way, authoritarian. But I think people also don't love Elon, and so Bannon benefits when he attacks Elon and SpaceX to some extent on there being anti-Elon sentiment, not among everyone, but among a good chunk of the public, and just sort of reflexively coasting on people's distrust in that respect.
I do think that one of the things that's interesting to think through is, as that technology and artificial intelligence trend continues, and as, like, let's say we are in a position where the right does sort of like embrace more of the Elon Teal types, where it's more like technologies are way out of this, by default, the other side's going to be sort of anti-technology in some ways.
This is where it gets really complicated, because that's for the social conservatives. Things like transhumanism, in the most immediate sense. Yeah, so IVF, IVF is a really good example of that. And that's a top priority. That is not a negotiable. That is right at the tippy top of the pyramid for them. And so that's where it becomes a question for like the Peter Thiels of the world. Is that a red line for you, or do you still say these social conservatives can be a vehicle for my overall agenda, which is maintaining Western civilization, or in Elon's case, getting Western civilization to Mars, saving Western civilization by getting it to Mars. So I will, allow these social conservatives to keep having their way on this thing until we get there, just like until we get to the election. And then it all blows up, and we can renegotiate these terms afterwards. But those clashes are definitely coming.
On the IVF thing specifically, do you think that is a core priority for social conservatives in general, or is that literally just the Catholic subsegment of social conservatism? Like, I don't hear that from anyone other than Catholics that I'm aware of.
No, so I'm evangelical. It's pretty significant. Not to, I don't think to the average like Sunday church going evangelical or Sunday church mass going Catholic. I don't think it's that high on their minds, but I do think that, whenever it becomes a pressing policy question, the interest groups that represent evangelicals or Catholics do take it to be like of utmost seriousness. And this is where, like, I always say this on abortion, for example, like I am in the tiniest minority of the country, and maybe not the tiniest, but a minority of the country. And my preferred policy solutions on that look beyond weird to the average voter. They creep the average voter out, and it wouldn't make sense for most Republican politicians who want to get elected to take my position necessarily on IVF or on abortion. Like that wouldn't go well for them, and then probably wouldn't go well for the country as a consequence. But the problem for the future of the Republican Party is that you have to keep those people in your coalition, because they will not vote for you. They will leave. They will stop giving money, period. If, for example, the idea of designer babies is indulged via policy decisions, or those policies are relaxed, or enforcement is relaxed, or things like that, you just lose people and money and resources. And can be really devastating in congressional elections, down ballot races, gubernatorial races. And so the glue to, and the left deals with this too, right? Like the weirdos on the left who think absolutely everything comes down to the borders of Israel. And I say that with respect to my fellow weirdos. I'm a weirdo on the right, and I have a lot of friends who are weirdos like that on the left. You're out of touch with, yeah, of course. Like you're out of touch with the average American on that question, and the left has to find a way to keep the glue with the rest of the coalition, or they risk. And I think that played into the presidential election, actually, frankly, their inability to do that.
What do you think is more likely, for the tech portion to peel off or for the evangelicals to peel off? Like, how do you view that?
I think the tech portion, because Democrats are becoming the party of white collar Americans. And that's where like Ro Khanna saying we shouldn't have lost Elon. I think it's really dangerous for Republicans. And I know my leftist friends are sort of like, oh, Ro, please, like we don't want the oligarchs. But in a sense, you can see where a EAC Dem party that is already breaking a bit with organized labor, already has an affluent, educated voter base that is increasingly populated around those big cities and not so much in the rural areas, and is very favorable to accelerationism and new technologies, likes electric vehicles, likes those types of things. Like that's actually, I think, a more natural marriage, 5 to 10 years down the road, than this MAGA version of the Republican Party. Now, that's the biggest open question in American politics, is what happens to the Republican Party after Donald Trump is no longer president of the United States, whether that's in 3 years or 7 years or longer. Who knows what he decides to do, and who knows what happens. I mean, he was almost killed last year, so I don't know what happens. I mean, if something like that were to happen, he's a martyr, and the Republican Party will be attached to him for 100 years, but I don't know. But if this trajectory continues, that's a more natural marriage, I think, than it is to the MAGA populist Republican Party.
What do you think is the biggest variable for the Republicans in the midterms for them to ensure they have it on lockdown so they can retain or increase their power in the Congress?
Inflation. They have to get prices under control. They have to, and that's why they're so desperate with the big, beautiful bill. And that's why I think people were especially pissed off with Elon, because the bill is seen as the necessary augmentation of the tariff agenda. Like, tariffs is like Trump's hierarchy of priorities, like top, and immigration and tariffs, both of those equal at the top. And if they don't, like, they were able to do the tariffs without Congress, but they always needed Congress to do the industrial policy, and they can't do the tariffs without the industrial policy. And they would say that. They did say that. They said, we have to pass the bill because it's the onshoring incentives. It's all of those carrots to get the jobs back to the United States and the investment back to the United States, taking the corporate tax rate down, having the write-offs retroactive to January for new building and factories and manufacturing and all of that. So they need that bill. And they can at least hope that they get 2 years of growth and dynamism in the economy from it. It's highly dubious, I think, whether that actually plays out, but maybe it's at least a sugar high that gets them through the midterms and into the presidential election cycle. But if they want to keep up the tariffs, which Donald Trump wants to keep up the tariffs, then they see that as absolutely necessary. And I think that's also why Elon's failure to grasp the very sad and tragic math, but the realistic math that Washington has in front of it, was extra frustrating for people in the White House.
Got it.
But what about the fact that the bill has all of the, it's that Biden level spending that is the thing that causes the inflation. So it's like you're passing the things that are supposed to fix the inflation alongside the things that are causing the inflation at the same time. That just sounds so nonsensical.
I mean, I think Republicans are right that the Congressional Budget Office tends to underestimate the growth that can come from tax cuts and even different incentives in the code and no tax on tips and blah, blah, all that sort of thing, what goes back into the economy. And I think that's probably what they would tell you if they were sitting here, is that just don't listen to the projections. We're actually doing more and blah, blah, blah.
Don't believe that makeup math. Believe our makeup math.
Yeah, exactly. It's propaganda either way you cut it. But and there are some serious estimates that come out of different groups who track these things, and you do your own logic and say, or do your own math and say, well, the spending level is not going down, so what are you talking about? But yeah, I mean, this is it's a what's the best way to put it? It's a catch-22. It's quicksand. There's just only so much that you can, it's really actually depressing and sad and bleak. So
yeah.
Yay. So let's entertain for a second, we've been living in the kind of assumptions here for this conversation that the conflict between Elon and Trump is 100% real, that all of the dust up is legitimate, that they have fundamental, misalignments in priorities and agendas and strategies in order to get from where we are to where we're going. There is at least a chance that the dust up is actually theater, that there is some sort of more strategic, this would be the people that are advocating the 4D chess thing, everything happens.
Let me go get my
reason.
tinfoil hat.
Yeah.
I'll be right back.
Yeah. Like, what do you because so one of the possibilities for us to get out from under this spending, since like Social Security and Medicare, like we said, those are the big, albatross around our necks into the future. And honestly, the problem with Medicare, the biggest problem with Medicare is how many regulations the government has on healthcare, period. And so like the best way to fix the Medicare problem long term is to just deregulate the mess out of it and allow technology to go. Like the thing that technology does is it allows you to get more of something for less inputs, more outputs for less inputs. And so if we can really let a lot of technology companies and startups deal with the healthcare problem in a less regulated way, then the price of that will fall over time. And so like, I think there is a legitimate case to be made that we can fix a lot of our issues by doing that with deregulation more so than just saying that we're going to, cut budgets here over the next, like instead of austerity, do efficiency driven by technology in those areas. And then for Social Security, we'll have to figure out a way to, maybe have the the conversation with, trying to monetize the assets of the United States or something along those lines. And so do you think, what would you say the likelihood is that there is a strategy like that the White House is pursuing with Elon, and that this is kind of just theater to keep people distracted and potentially, reduce the leverage that China has in these trade negotiations as well, since Elon is kind of caught in between China and the United States, that, if they're threatening to punish Elon and Tesla in these negotiations, that leverage, that threat against Elon and Tesla and these other companies kind of gets mitigated if they don't appear to be so cozy from the outside.
I would put it at like 0.0001%. That's what it would have to be a secret kept by Trump and Elon Musk and nobody else, basically. That would be
everyone else.
Signal, you mean their signal chat?
Yeah. I mean, the level of discipline I would put beyond the capability of either Donald Trump or Elon Musk to keep a secret like that. But yeah, I mean, that's the other, I guess, depressing, bleak reality of Medicare, Medicaid, the American healthcare system, more broadly, Social Security, retirement, another good example. Maybe there's a rosy outlook that AI just proves by its existence as it develops in the next 5 to 10 to 20 years that there are better ways to do this. I think what though prevents people from reform, even though we know these programs are failing, even though we know these programs could be stronger, and that our status quo, allowing the status quo to fester, allows the programs to rust, basically. Even though we know that, the thing that keeps us from doing it is the uncertainty that comes with reform and the political consequences of that. So it's possible that AI comes along and reassures everyone that, there's a way to get healthcare or to deregulate or to look to new solutions that are AI driven in ways that we can't even conceive of sitting here right now, but a year from now are clear. Maybe that's the rosy outlook, that there's something coming that'll be cheap and efficient, and we will, have no choice but to do it because it'll look so obviously better. I mean, that's happened before in history. cars are a good example of something that people were really skeptical of, and that came and, we're just took everything over. So who knows? It's so bad that you just feel like at some point something has to give. I just don't know when. And I guess we also just have to pray that it's not a violent situation when it does.
One of the things, sort of like the last question here, the thing that's been interesting through this time is that if there is that economic unlock, if it happens, what does that do to Trump's approval rating? Because that's one of the things that I've been thinking through is I sort of made this public bet, kind of tongue in cheek, but the part of me was like my forever optimist side, and somebody who didn't vote for Trump in 16 or 20 and kind of viewed him as my sort of views have transformed. I'm still sort of upset about specifically how they're handling the debt, and like with your context, I understand why now, but let's just say I prefer him over the alternative, but I still have some open questions. But if he's able to unlock the economy and things do legitimately get better for people in the short term, where they're able to have jobs, they are making more money, they have more options, like there are more jobs coming to America, it seems like Trump will finally have the moment where his approval rating will be in the positive. Like it will be like significantly in the positive. How likely do you think that is? Or do you think he's just completely capped because he's just too abrasive? And I think his approach, yeah.
No, I mean, I think he's like singular in the respect that he's capped because he's so polarizing that even if he, like the Trump economy was pretty good towards the end of his first term before COVID, and his approval rating was higher. But I think he still works within the max 45% approval range. So somewhere around there. Like he always has somewhere between 35 to 45% approval of the country, and even with the American economy was arguably at its best when he was in towards the end of his first term as president, and he was still enormously polarizing. So I think it's fairly capped. I'd never say never with him because he's constantly proving everybody wrong. But it just, I think there's so many people that even if Donald Trump is doing everything right, there's just something so offensive about the way he's doing it that, maybe you can move a couple of people on material grounds. They have a little bit more money and cash in their pocket and all of that. But they still, will not relent on their opposition to what he's, the way that he's doing things. And the way that he's already done so much that some people will just never, some people will never get over January 6th, for example. Not everyone, not the average voter, but there are some people who just, you can give them the best job, fix their healthcare system, and they're just, it'll still always be, staining their idea of who Trump is and whether they should approve or disapprove of him.
What do you think about the different media landscape that we live in now? So how much of that negative approval rating was driven by a media apparatus that was fundamentally driven to be unfair against them versus one now in 2024, 2025? We talked about this last time you were on. That seems a little bit more independent, more nuanced. There's broader spectrum of opinion, and people seem to be, especially independents and Republicans, by and large, they've abandoned legacy media and they're much more on the independent train. Trump going on those podcasts, doing those long-form discussions, having lunch with Bill Maher. It would be the feud between Elon and Trump. I was impressed by how graceful and restrained Trump was, and I'm like, when's the last time I've used those words with Trump? Never, ever in my life. And I'm a huge Elon fan, obviously. And I'm like, Elon, you're such an idiot. And then Trump is like, if he ever wants to call me, he can. I really do wish him the best. Starlink is great. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening? This is a bizarre world, right? So how much of that do you think is going to play into his ability, or are we overplaying that dynamic?
I did this on Starlink at your recommendation, by the way, Farzad.
How do you like it?
I love it. Huge fan. Huge fan. Yes. I will mention, I noticed after Elon and Donald Trump had feuds, my service in DC was not as good, but that could just be me reading into it. I wonder if there was some tinkering happening.
I think everyone was using the Starlink at that point because everything was fucking falling apart. Yeah.
Yes. So I think that is really important. I think it's partially why Dems right now are botching the LA riot response from a political perspective. Not getting into the substance or anything, but just the politics of it. I think they don't realize that a lot of the shift in the country has come because those legacy media outlets that they are running to tell their story right now are just less powerful. And so their story needs to be different, not just, the same old on those old platforms. Because, the power, the gatekeepers are just so much less powerful. I think that's true. I still just think, though, that Trump himself, people have such strongly formed opinions of him 10 years in to the Trump phenomena that the strong opinions of him, he's a very strong character that just for the average voter, it doesn't change much. I think the reason that he fluctuates from the 35 to 45 range, roughly speaking, is because there are still people who are getting information from different channels. And, there were people who voted Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump. There are just people whose politics are unpredictable and shift and, get their information from different places and aren't cookie cutter types. There's some amount of them. And the death of the corporate press and legacy press gatekeepers is, I think, moving people, but still within that, for him at least, within that spectrum broadly. But it's hard to say. I mean, so much of this is just like, I don't even know at this point because it's so unpredictable. There used to be such formulas. I mean, if you go to talk to DC publicists, people who worked on Capitol Hill 20 years ago, they had press releases that were templates, plug and play, that you would send to the same list and change the words or the names depending on the principle, and you could pretty well predict the outcome of that campaign. You can't even conceive of the direction at this point. I mean, it's so unpredictable.
Do you think politics has been disrupted forever?
Yeah. I think civilizations, basically, industrial civilization is in a constant state of disruption because industrial civilization is the story of technology, and technology is constant and disruptive. So I think we're only a couple of hundred years into industrial civilization, and it's new to us as a species. And we're now, I think, because of Trump, honestly, not just because of Trump, but the populist pushback to globalization that he embodies more than anyone else. I think what we're seeing is, as a species, us coming to terms with how it's so much bigger than Trump. It's social media and smartphones. I think when social media and smartphones combined, they changed things so quickly. It took us a long time, although a short time relative to human history, to catch up to the fact that we were in this incredible period of acceleration. And I think part of this is just us coming to terms with acceleration and disruption, and realizing that we are living like on the edge of history. And once we realize that, there's a certain peace that comes with it as a species. But I mean, I don't think American politics is ever going to go back to being the race that everyone expected between Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush. We're never going to have something that's as predictable and routine as Washington was used to.
Just even saying those two names sounds so ridiculous.
Well, everyone here, everyone here, if you walk at any bar here, talk to a lobbyist, they will all tell you, like, if we could just go back to that. But if you go to a bar in the rest of the country, they'll be like, what the hell are you? I hate those people. I hate Jeb Bush. I hate Hillary Clinton. Like, nobody wants that. So it's a total disconnect.
That's so crazy. Okay, my actual last question, if that's okay. Do I have you for a couple more minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So what you just described resonates. I think it's going to resonate with a gigantic majority of my audience, and I think the big majority of the overall population. How the fuck Did the Democrat Party miss that when they had the tech folks on their side? And now you're watching them deal with this Trump administration. Anytime there's an opening for them to just come in and put their foot right through and be like, see, it's like they just punch themselves in the face as hard as they can. And it's like there is a fundamental rot with that party, it seems like. Do you agree with that statement? Can you give us
Well, it's just what we were talking about before, that they are such an impenetrable bubble because of class stratification. And it's sort of, again, we've talked about this a lot, but that is a problem of their own making. They have created this problem for themselves by getting into this feedback loop. Nobody forced them into the feedback loop. They got into the feedback loop. And it's very true. This is the professional managerial class. And that is who runs the party. But it's not who the party needs only to vote for. They obviously need to have a broader coalition. And so when you run Wall Street, Washington, and Hollywood, and stuff is changing a little bit, in recent years, but say in 2016, when you ran all of those institutions, you didn't question anything. You could do whatever. They felt like they were at the top of the world. Davos was at its height. Nobody could touch them. And so I think that they still aren't out of that bubble. Even when they think they're out of that bubble, they're still in the bubble. And so I don't know. I mean, I think they need a class takeover. The problem that their split with Silicon Valley, I think, was really over the culture war. I think it was over Silicon Valley being like, hey, if you look at David Sachs, for example, or if you look at the All In guys more broadly, it was ultimately culture war issues that had them being like, what the fuck is wrong with you guys? And because of the culture war stuff is what, Wall Street wants low taxes, but for a while they would not entertain the idea that it was okay to question pronouns or whatever the hell else. Like, they were doing DEI, they were doing ESG. So the culture war stuff was really devastating. And that's the feedback loop that they're still not out of. And you see it right now in the response to the rioting.
I mean, I'll tell you, like, the thing that encapsulates this for me the most is like listening to Sam Harris, who's one of the most brilliant minds we have. Truly, I really do think he's one of the smartest guys we have. Like, his IQ has to be through the roof. But even somebody as smart as him, whom I do respect, he came out and said, well, I guess I really underestimated, or like I felt like I was lied to, or whatever. Like, I fell for the Biden thing. And I'm like, how much are you meditating, bro? Like, are you not in reality right now? Like, how did your eyes lie? How did you allow your eyes to lie to you? And if the bubble is really that fundamental, where their perception of reality does not actually communicate what reality is, how do you escape that?
Even when he didn't agree with all the culture war stuff, like, he found all the culture war stuff obnoxious and still got hoodwinked by the bubble.
Right. It's unbelievable. It's like, it's so like, what saves that party? Who saves that party? Like, what has to happen for the Democrat Party to become a formidable opponent so that the voters of this country actually end up winning by having competition at the top of who can run the country? Like, what saves that party?
Well, I think a former Democrat television host should run for president on a populist ticket, denouncing his former party, and we'll see what happens. But it's a tongue-in-cheek answer, because it's like, if anything,
you're talking about Stephen A. Smith?
No, I'm talking about Trump. But yeah, there you go, Stephen A. Smith. But like, if anything could shake Dems and the media out of their feedback loop, you would think it would be the former Secretary of State, getting defeated when the media said the polls were all in the wrong. Like, it couldn't be done at the hands of the man who was hosting Celebrity Apprentice 6 months earlier. If anything could do it, you would think it would be that. And trust in media actually decreased afterwards. It's at a historic low again now, the same historic low it was at in 2017, because the media dug its heels in deeper into that trench and, burrowed further into the bubble. And it's just like, And that's the thing with a bubble. It's impossible to get out of. It's the thing with a feedback loop. It's a loop. You can't get out of it. And so what they need is their voters to get them out of it. They need a takeover. They need someone to take over the party from them. Because they can't appeal to anyone outside of themselves. And again, like the immigration thing is so, they hit this man with lawfare. January 6th happened and they couldn't beat him in a presidential, like it's just, it does boggle the mind. But a lot of it is because they just can't get themselves out of it. And it shouldn't be a surprise to us when they continue to not learn the lesson, because that's the point of the loop. You can't really get out of it.
What is Crystal's take? Like, what is, like, Crystal Ball? Like, what's her? Because, I know she's obviously like somebody. I mean, as a viewer, I view her as somebody who would be significantly more aligned with that party than anyone else that I would trust their opinions of. That are like, what is like, what's her? What is she hoping to get out of this? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think her dream scenario would be that this. I think she shares that diagnosis that the Democratic Party's elites are so totally out of touch, that they're missing opportunities that are important politically, but more importantly, substantively, to relate with working class Americans. So I think that the dream scenario is that populism finally does create a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders prove that populism is more palatable than, or it's easier to sell than the elitism of the status quo Democratic Party. And they just end up taking the reins, that the sort of Zoran Mamdanis and AOCs end up taking the reins of the party because the people put them there. And I think that would be like Crystal's scenario, like fantasy scenario coming out of all of this.
How likely do you think that is? How likely do you think that is?
I think the Democrats are going to have a hard time pushing populism further and further to the side, which is interesting because we were just talking about how they may end up being the party of tech because they have an increasingly affluent and educated base. At the same time, though, it just, so much of it depends on what happens at the end of Trumpism. Is it Trump stepping back? Does something happen to Trump? God forbid something tragic happen to Trump that makes him a martyr, that changes the Republican Party. I don't know. But I do think that, like, I don't know how much longer they can hold back the Bernie. They tried to hold him back by adopting a lot of his policies and gesturing at them. Even Kirsten Gillibrand was saying, "I'm not taking super PAC money." Like, it was just so absurd. But who knows, if they're able to pull that off again by saying, we're in style and substance, we're basically Bernie Sanders, just vote for us, we're not old and cranky. And then going back to being corporatists. So I don't know. It's hard to say.
Man, another great conversation. We're gonna have to keep having you back, Emily. It's just like it's so fun talking to you. It's I think your perspective is super helpful. And I really appreciate you having me on your show. It was so fun being there. Super cool. But yeah, where can people find you? Let the people know.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Always happy to do this. Thank you for coming on. People can watch Undercurrents and Breaking Points. You can get that wherever you download your podcast. You can get it on YouTube. You can get it on Rumble. That's where we are.
Awesome. Go check them out.